It was a simple yes or no question, just like the referendum, in fact, and just as dangerous. If another EU vote was held tomorrow, would Theresa May vote to leave? She was asked 3 times. Thrice she ducked the question. She said she would not answer hypotheticals. She would have to weigh up the evidence. She told us at some length how she had voted before, which was Remain. I'll take that as a no, then. It's not surprising that the PM took evasive action and sat on the fence. It's worked for Corbyn when it comes to the most divisive and challenging issue of modern times. But it does make Remainers like her into unwilling executioners. As if the PM and most of the Cabinet know they're taking the country to the cliff edge. But it's the will of the people. What's the alternative? I say there is an alternative. Before we self-destruct with a no deal or a bad deal, find a spine and allow Parliament a proper vote on the deal before we go over the cliff in a bucket. And to hell with the will of the people. Leave this one to the MPs.
Well, presumably there will be a vote. There is going to be a vote at the end of it on the terms. And hopefully enough MPs will do what their conscience tells them as opposed to what their party is telling them, and gets rid of this ridiculous 48-52, that was an overwhelming majority, and actually say, no, these terms aren't good enough, or they are good enough. And if they think they're not good enough, and the majority think they're not good enough, then put them to the British people. Then have another referendum on those. Now, I think that's the only credible way forward now.
The problem with it is that, as it's framed at the moment, the choice that the MPs are going to have is between the deal that is reached or no deal. And if they don't like the deal that is reached, we go out with no deal. So there is no real mechanism yet for saying we can't actually stop this and get out of it at all, unless, of course, she reverses Article 50. Wait a minute, Carol, sorry, hold on. Theresa May, we know, has commissioned research on whether she can reverse Article 50. That hasn't been published, as have none of these Brexit studies on the various impacts of Brexit on the sector been published.
Do you understand the concept of democracy? Greg just said he hopes MPs will do what their conscience and their party tells them. No, do what your constituents told you. MPs
no, you don't understand Burkean parliamentary democracy at all, Carol.
But there we go. And John Bercow today says in the House of Commons that we can throw out Brexit, we can disregard what the people say. This is exactly what we'll get to in my debate. You're not listening to what the people of this country say.
Nobody is throwing out what we're saying.
You are, because you know Parliament will chuck it out. Well, no, let me say, because you know Parliament will chuck it out.
Yeah. No, I'm not saying Parliament. Parliament will only decide, OK, we have another referendum. And that stage, the people can decide.
I think with Brexit, I think it's a really peculiar situation could emerge, whereby hard Brexiteers may find that Theresa May's deal is too soft for them, and Remainers are obviously opposed to it. Remainers like me, opposed to it because we don't want Brexit in the first place. So we could end up in this really interesting situation once she puts a deal to the country, and that is that hardcore Brexiteers may oppose her deal because it doesn't go far enough, and Remainers could ally with them opposing it because it goes too far. In that situation, is there any circumstance that you can conceive of whereby the deal is worse than the reasons you voted for Brexit in the first place?
What I just wish is that the Parliament would do what the people of this... Well, OK, I think, yes, I think probably nothing the government does would be good enough for hard Remainers. But what...
That wasn't my question. That wasn't my question. With respect, are there any circumstances you can think of that the deal for you would be worse than the reasons you voted for Brexit in the first place?
No.
None whatsoever.
Well, so you're willing to crash out?
Yes.
You're willing to have no deal and crash out?
I am willing to walk away without a deal, because I actually think, you know...
Even if it means tanking our economy.
Let's put that to the people.
When I hear the Leader of the House of Commons saying that we can just scrap what the people of this country said, scrap what they voted for, and get every MP to vote against it, and then that'll be Brexit.
OK, can we go...
That makes
Carol,
me incandescent.
Carol, I know you get very cross about this, and you go on and on about the will of the people in almost everything you say.
Well, why not? It is the will of the people.
Do you know why referenda are banned in Germany? Because they lead to mob rule. If you put, as we've discussed before, the death penalty to a referendum, the will of the people would say, let's restore the death penalty. The reason we have elected MPs is because we don't have mob rule in this country, Carol, which I think is quite a good thing.
No, they don't. You are completely wrong. That's not what parliamentary government in this country is about.
MPs to decide what's best for us. I'm sick of being told what's best for us.
Oh, well, then why don't you have a referendum on everything?
I'm sick. Well, don't be stupid. That's Mr.
You want a rule by referendum.
You want rule by referendum.
Right. OK, just settle down, everybody. It's time for June to have her say. Do you think that when this is put to MPs, they will get a meaningful vote that could do anything to reverse going over the cliff in a bucket, as I said in my cue?
Well, as it stands, no. As it stands, it's what you're saying. It's either we accept the deal that she's got or we have no deal. But I think what you suggested, Greg, is actually the only option. Let's take the deal back to the people. If you're saying we want the will of the people, let them see what they're voting for.
Voted, June.
But let's let them know their deal. They voted
not on the deal.
knowing the terms of the deal.
Not on the deal. And
now
actually,
let's take the terms of the deal to them. And we may get a different outcome.
It's because they know parliamentarians are going to vote it down, and they know that will actually...
That's not necessarily true, but
what John...
I never thought I'd say this, but I think Speaker John Bercow has done the country a huge favour today. He said he'd voted Remain, and he's also reminded the country that Parliament is sovereign.
Yes.
MPs can do what they want. They are not bound by the result of this referendum. It is an advisory referendum which Theresa May is executing against her own will.
We weren't told that it was an advisory referendum.
It is an advisory referendum.
Can we conceive of a scenario in which... Can we conceive of a scenario in which 80% of the country rejects the deal for whatever reason, either because it's too soft or too hard? In that scenario, you know, I've spoken to people where they've said they've been hardcore Brexiteers, but they would oppose a deal that is too soft. They would oppose the fact there's not going to be a border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. They would oppose any jurisdiction of the ECJ remaining over the United Kingdom, and therefore the deal would be too soft for them. In that scenario, if 80% of the public, either because it's too hard or too soft, want to reject the deal, how is that undemocratic?
Do you think Leavers would reject a plan if they thought it meant that Brexit was going to be scrapped? I don't think they would for a second.
How is it undemocratic?
Can I just say what Majid is saying is that what we could result is the worst of all worlds, both for Remainers and for Leavers. We're out of the EU with all the club benefits, but for Leavers' purposes, we are still rule takers. That is probably the option we're going to be left with. In that situation, Carol, would you prefer to remain as we are, or to be rule takers, subject to a lot of ECJ rules, out of the single market? Do you see what I mean?
There was a suggestion this week to join NAFTA.
I want to put it to you,
because you know what my answer to the question is. I mean, it's the same thing. It's always the same question. This week there was a proposal to go to NAFTA. That, to me, sounds like a very good idea.
EFTA.
No, NAFTA.
OK, to be part of the North American Free Trade Association.
Yes, that was a story this week. What do you mean, how?
Because was that one from Lady Gaga
so
again?
Will we join North America? We become Canada or America?
We don't become them. We trade with them. They have a trading bloc. And the suggestion was that we join them, which I think is a very good idea.
I'm genuinely curious about whether if 80% of the country did, if 80% of the country were opposed to the final deal.
But you don't know they're going to be.
No, hypothetical question. Please don't do a Theresa May and say you're not answering hypotheticals. How would that be undemocratic? If 80% of the country rejected what would be a fudge? You know, sometimes a compromise doesn't work.
I think it's a hypothetical question, so therefore it's not a real question. But I don't think 80% of it...
But we are speaking about the future, so it can only be hypothetical.
Where you might be right is, I mean, the evidence... There's no overwhelming evidence that suggests if we did it again, the result would be different. But I think that might be the case if it means crashing out. If the choice is, look, you either have to crash out or we have to stay in, there's no deal, then I think there would be a majority for staying in, personally. But I'm prepared to put it to the people and let the people decide, which is what you go on about.
But we've put it to the people, and what this government's job now is to get us a deal of some kind.
But Carol, also, don't you think it's also making sure that people know what the repercussions of crashing out are?
Carol, if you think that... Carol, can I ask you one...
people out there, all of you,
Carol,
do people know? Yes, of course they know.
Carol, if you think... If you're so convinced that people would still vote to leave, why not
I'm so convinced.
Why not put it to a second referendum after the deal?
Because it's the desperation of Remainers who are so desperate to get the result they want. You'd keep doing it. What happens next time?
No, because what you're frightened of is by now the public has heard Philip Hammond say that planes couldn't fly. They've heard people say that you have to turn over Kent to a lorry park. And actually, these things, they understand these things.
His own Prime Minister has slapped him down. That will not happen.
But we all know it. His own Prime Minister is now irrelevant, isn't she? I mean, she doesn't know what to do. She can't get rid of him. She can't get rid of Boris. If she got rid of Hammond, you've immediately got, within the Conservative Party, a grouping, the Remain bloc, and then she won't get anything. So I feel very sorry for her. I think she's in a terrible position.
One of the things with this debate is it does lead to a lot of name-calling. It does lead to accusations. I mean, I heard you say treachery earlier. I wouldn't necessarily want to go there because I wouldn't call you a racist, for example, for supporting Brexit. But I wouldn't.
For voting
I wouldn't,
leave.
and I'm speaking to you directly. And I think it's important for us to move away from some of the abuse in this conversation and keep it civil, which is a nice